Recording in progress. It says we're opening up the doors. You are all waiting. You guys are so great. And we are live on Facebook at the Hyannis Country Garden Facebook page. So welcome, 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 everyone. I always love knowing if this is your first time on a happy hour with me. And if it is, I would love you to type that in chat. And you find the chat in the speech bubble that's usually at the bottom of your screen, but maybe on the side if it's a different device. And you click on that speech bubble and you can type in there. And great, Jean has already said that it's her first time here. So welcome. And welcome, of course, to those of you who have been with me on these happy hours since the pandemic, right? I mean, that's where we started as we needed desperately some happy times from March 2020 on. So we are continuing, though, not every week anymore. We don't need it quite as desperately as we did during COVID, but we are continuing to be here at least once a month with a happy hour from Hyannis Country Garden. Today, as you can see, I am virtually in the nursery, and we are getting plants in. The nursery is chock-a-block, and the annuals are pouring in, and the perennials are pouring in, and it is such an exciting time in the garden, isn't it? So if this is your first time, oh, Robert, you already know what I'm going to say. If this is your first time with me, I love to hear what you've got in your glass, okay? And it could be tea, it could be water, it could be wine, it could be bourbon, I don't care, because what's in your glass isn't as important as the fact that we are here together for the next hour. We are raising our glasses, and I've got water in my glass right now because I can't drink in Zoom. But we are raising our glasses or our cups and saying how wonderful it is that we can be virtually here celebrating plants and gardens. Now, another thing that you need to know is that I don't respond to raised hands here because it's too difficult. It's too difficult to answer to raised hands and monitor what I am saying and be coherent and keep a little eye on the chat. All right. So just know that. Don't click on the raised hand because I won't respond. Multitasking is a little bit beyond me. But in any case, what I do want you to know, particularly if this is your first time here, is that at any time you can put a question in chat. Now, when I am doing the presentation, I don't go back to chat because that kind of interrupts the flow. And so I'll do the presentation first, and then I come back to chat and I start from top to bottom and I answer your questions. All right. If we have time to get to them all before 6 o'clock when we have to go and eat dinner, if we have time to get to them all, that's great. If I don't get to them all, I always save chat, and then I make sure to put all of the unanswered questions in the Hyannis Country Garden blog, either on Sunday or Monday. Usually it's Monday, and I will answer your question there on the blog, okay? So know that I will get to all questions one way or the other. And you all have lovely sounding drinks, and you can type in questions either right away or you can type in questions after I finish the presentation. So speaking of the presentation, let's get to it. All right, let's get to sharing my screen, and we will share that now. We will play the slideshow, and we are off and running on another happy hour, and this one is celebrating notable natives for Cape Cod. I am going to be talking about perennials and shrubs and trees, so know that. And if this is your first time with me, know that you can use your cell phone to take a picture of anything that I'm showing, or you can take a screenshot. And also, this is being recorded in two places. It's being recorded on Facebook Live, where the quality isn't quite as good as it is when you're with me on Zoom. And it is also being recorded in the cloud so that we can post this on the bottom of the Hyannis Country Garden events page. And you will find there at the bottom of the Hyannis Country Gardens events page many of these happy hours. Okay, we will find recordings from many of the happy hours going back through the seasons and through the years. Okay, now what is a native plant? Well, you're looking at a native plant right here. Poison ivy. Poison ivy is a native plant. So a native plant isn't always something you want growing in your yard. Poison ivy has a lot to recommend it in the world of plants, except for that one little quality that makes it so annoying. But a native plant is, not necessarily even something that people say it grows well here. I have people come into the garden center frequently and say, I want something that's native. And I say, all right, why do you want native? Because I want something that grows well here. Well, some plants grow well here that are not native. Lilacs, for example, beautiful. And this is going to be a great lilac year, but it is not a native plant. A native plant is an indigenous species that has evolved and occur naturally in a region. That's a native plant. All right. Some native plants have altered themselves over the years. There are new native plants who have evolved naturally, discovered all the time, that are then, put out into the population. And there are some people that define regions very tightly. I take a broad definition of a native plant for Massachusetts. I am willing to consider plants that are native to the Northeast and even North America in general. Not everyone agrees with that, and that's fine. We can all have different opinions and still tend gardens beautifully. Now, why do you want native plants? You want native plants for several reasons. Yes, because they grow well here. All right. So that's, one huge reason. Native plants often take fewer resources to grow them. And by resources, I mean fertilizers, pesticides, and water. So native plants have evolved to get by with what nature delivers in a particular area. And you might want them for that reason alone, because they require less water. They get fewer pests, right? They don't require fertilization. That's a good reason to plant natives. Also, a great reason to plant natives, and the ones that I think many people totally embrace, is that natives support local wildlife. And they support local wildlife in many ways. The ways that people often think of is that they have, say, fruit or berries or something that the native wildlife eats. But that's not the only way that a native plant supports local wildlife. Sometimes the value of a native plant is that it supports insects that wildlife eat. And this is particularly important for our songbirds. So many people don't make the connection between loving the songbirds and yet needing to have the insects that the songbirds feed their babies. And many native plants support those insects. They are the food source for insects. Maybe they're the food source for the larval stage of a particular butterfly. So that's the reason to have natives as well. So we're going to start off tonight with perennials. And if you have just joined me, and welcome, we've got a full house tonight. If you have just joined me, know that you can take a screenshot. You can shoot the screen with your cell phone if you'd like. You can take notes about these plants. Go old school, have a pen and paper. Or you can always come back and watch the recording of this later from the hyanniscountrygarden.com events page. I'm going to start out with one of my favorite spring flowering plants. And we have these right now at Country Garden. This is one where you really need to learn the botanic name Stylophorum. And the reason that you want to know that is celandine poppy, the common name. There is another plant called lesser celandine that is an invasive plant and not a good plant that you don't want. You want this one, Stylophorum celandine poppy. The foliage is pretty. This plant loves the shade. It self-seeds in a gentle way. And here it is in my garden in Osterville several years ago, growing alongside a pathway, a stone pathway, and along with, many other plants, including epimedium and the lunaria. Neither of those are natives, but the stylophorum was a lovely plant in there. If you have a shade garden, I encourage you to plant this plant for spring flowering in May. Another spring flowering native plant is foam flower, tiarella. And there are a couple of different species of tiarella, both of them lovely. One that spreads more than others, one that is more clump growing. This is a semi-evergreen plant for shade. And here you can see, down here, see that burgundy foliage down there? That's what the foliage looks like in the winter time. It turns burgundy. And then in the spring, the new growth goes up above it with the flowers. You don't have to clean this plant up. And that's another advantage of many natives, is that they can cook along on their own. Foam flower makes a great companion to other shade plants such as ferns or hosta. Many of the varieties of foam flower have little dark blotches on the leaves. They have finer foliage than the hostas, so nice contrast and early flowering. Now, if you are a meticulous deadheader, going out and clipping off the old flowers with a pair of scissors on a regular basis, you can keep these into flower through June. I kind of think that, you either deadhead your foam flower or you have a real life because it does take a lot of time to do that. But that's up to you. In any case, the flowers for the spring season are beautiful on tiarella. Columbine, it's a native plant, and this is one that the bees like. This is a plant that you're kind of surprised where they come up. This is a self-seeding plant. It is not a long-lived perennial. I have to be honest with you about that. But when you don't deadhead it and you let it go to seed, it will appear in a variety of places, and you almost never know what you're going to get. Sometimes you get the red Aquilegia canadensis, and sometimes you get a purple one. This one appeared in my garden a couple of years ago, a bicolor and a double flower. It just comes out of the blue. So learn to recognize the foliage of your columbine. If you buy one, you take a picture of the leaves so that next spring, if that one doesn't come back, and usually they do come back for a couple of years, but if that one doesn't come back, look for leaves because you will find them. Where columbine is happy, you will always have them. I love ostrich fern in shade. Now, this one is a spreader. You have to be totally transparent about this plant. Where it is in good soil and it is happy, it will spread. Not invasively. Really, a native plant can't be invasive, but it can, on the right circumstance, be kind of aggressive. In drier soil, it does not spread that much. So if you have a place where you don't water, this is not going to be a vigorous plant, but quite vigorous where it is in moisture. I know this plant grows wild in the ditches out in the mid-Hudson Valley where I used to live. And in their clay soil, in the ditches where it's moist, they can get 3 and 4 feet tall. Here on the Cape, in my average sandy, garden, ordinary, occasionally watered garden soil, they get to be about 3 feet tall. But a beautiful plant. This is where fiddleheads that many people eat come from. I just like the look of the fiddlehead so much I'm not going to eat them. And you have to get them at the right time and prepare them in the perfect way. So I would rather enjoy these in my garden. Virginia bluebells. I mean, how can you resist that color, right? You can't resist that color. It is a beautiful plant. It is a great plant for early flying pollinators, and it is a plant that is in flower when the hummingbirds come back, and the hummingbirds will work your Virginia bluebells. So even if you haven't gotten around to putting out a hummingbird feeder, and all of my hummingbird feeders are naturally grown. I don't do the sugar water. But even if you do a hummingbird feeder, if you plant Virginia bluebells, you will know that the hummingbirds will instantly have sustenance when they arrive back from their winter digs down south. Now, this is a plant that I was thrilled to see that we had at Country Garden this season because it is one of my favorite spring flowering ground covers for part shade. It is an erigeron, and there are many varieties of erigeron. This one is called Robin's Plantain. And the reason I love it is, first of all, it has these daisy-like flowers in the spring, so that's great. But even more important, the ground cover, it spreads and it has a kind of a grayish green leaf that grows thickly enough that it outcompetes weeds. Win-win. So, and I love, to my mind, a ground cover should be attractive and it should outcompete weeds. And if it can be a native at the same time, I love that. So look for this one. It is not very well known, but when you find it, you will be a happy person, particularly if you have a part shade garden. This is a plant that I recommend, I would recommend this plant, whether it's native or not. It is a native. It is Amsonia hubrectii, willow leaf blue star. This is how it looks in the spring when it's in bloom. And here on the Cape, this flowers in late May or early June. And this right here is reason enough to grow it, right? But I have to tell you that when my garden is open in July during the Cape Cod Hydrangea Festival, this is the plant that everybody asks about. Oh, what is that? And it's not in flower. If someone asks about a plant that's not in flower, you know that that's a great plant. This is why they ask about it in July. All right, it is soft. It is kind of grass-like. It is pretty. It is full. Everything to recommend it. It's also extremely drought tolerant. So that is a great reason to have it in your garden. But the other reason to have it in your garden is this. It has incredible fall color. This is one of the few perennials that many people plant for the fall color alone. And here on Cape Cod, this happens in October. You have brilliant yellow on the Amsonia in the fall. Mayapple. This is a hard one to find in cultivation. I haven't seen this in Country Garden yet, but that doesn't mean we won't get it. It just means we need to find a grower who does it. But I love this plant because of how it looks when it comes up. I mean, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? It is gorgeous. And then they turn into kind of umbrella-like growth. This plant can go dormant when it gets dry in the summertime. So it's a good one for shade gardens, either that are moist or where you have other plants growing that take over later on in the summer and the fall. But a pretty plant. There's always been a great stand of this at Armstrong Kelly Park in Osterville, and it's near the current children's garden, so you might go there to look for how it is in the wild. Now, this is not native to the eastern United States, but I think it's worth mentioning for two reasons. First of all, it's one of the few bulbs that is native to the USA. So that's a great reason. Another great reason, it makes a great cut flower. Oh, I'm thinking of more than two reasons. It's a great cut flower. Number three, it's a stylish plant. From when it starts to come up, the stems are kind of black and then the buds are there. That's the stage it's in my garden right now. To later in May and in June, when you see the flowers like this, they're blue, they're beautiful. And the other reason that you might love this is you can plant it in a place where later you are going to grow other things like annuals. I have it here planted in a section of my garden I call Annual Alley, where I am very soon packing this filled with annuals for the summertime. And the advantage to having Camassia there is that it goes dormant in the summer. Shortly after it flowers, it disappears. So it's a nice one for early on, but you don't have to put up with either messy foliage or something else later on. The final reason that you might want to be interested in this is that it's one of the few bulbs that tolerate wet soil. This area of my garden, when it's rainy, like in the springtime, this can be a damp part of my garden. And the Camassia is happy as a camas right there. So a good one to know about, even if it's not a northeastern native. Another plant that loves it damp is green and gold, Chrysogonum virginicum, virginianum, sorry. Chrysogonum virginianum, green and gold is the common name. This one loves it damp. If you have a damp place in your yard, if you need a plant for socks and shoes in your rain garden, this is the one to plant. It blooms heavily in May, and then you get sporadic flowers later on in the summer. Bloody cranesbill, Geranium sanguineum. I don't know where the bloody comes from, except for I think maybe the roots might be kind of reddish. That might be it. There are many cranesbill geraniums. Not all of them are native here, but this one is. And this one I love because it's kind of delicate. It's a good socks and shoes plant around shrubs. It's excellent in full sun or part shade gardens. It plays well with others, works well with hosta in the part shade. It blooms heavily early in June. And then if you leave it alone, it's decent enough and it self-seeds gently in places. So that's a good quality. But if you want to, you can either chop it down with a hedge trimmer or even run a lawnmower over it, and it will come back with new and fresh foliage and more flowers later. So a very nice plant to have in and among other perennial plants. Oh, we can't talk about natives in this area without talking about Asclepias tuberosa. This is one of the native plants that supports monarch butterflies. And of course, bees and other pollinators. Here you can see a wasp, a honeybee, and a monarch all hanging out together here, getting together for a nice evening meal. And butterfly weed is one of the most drought-tolerant perennials. Put it in a dry garden. It will self-seed in a nice way, not in an obnoxious way. And if you're one of those people who says that, oh, I don't like orange in my garden, I encourage you to snap out of it because this is a beautiful plant. Look at that. And frankly, in July, when it's hot and the sun is strong, we need strong flowers. We need strong colors that, can compete with that summer sun. And as you can see on this picture, the native bees love it too. Here, many bumblebees are here. This plant will also self-seed, and you get to see this in the fall, right? When those seed pods open up and are backlit by the sun, it's magical. And it helps you appreciate that nature has so many wonderful ways to distribute seeds on the planet. some of them by flying away. If you buy any milkweed seeds, be it the pink, taller growing milkweed or this Asclepias tuberosa milkweed, know that the seeds need to go through the winter in order to germinate. So what you want to do is smear them right on the surface of the soil where you want them to grow, and then let them be there over the winter time. So if you are growing one of these milkweed, this butterfly weed, right, and you see the seeds doing this, don't take them off and save them inside the house for next spring. Put them where you want to grow right away so that they can grow through the winter because they need that cold time going into the warm, wet spring in order to bloom. And these do not self-seed in an obnoxious way. They self-seed in a good, oh, look, there's a butterfly weed kind of way. Purple coneflower. Now, this is one that's sort of a Midwestern prairie native that we, of course, have adopted as our own here in the Northeast for so many reasons. They are drought tolerant. The bees love them. They are great cut flowers. They are beautiful in the summer garden in July and August and often into September. Pollinator support plants, you know. And if you deadhead them, they keep blooming longer. Great. If you don't deadhead them and you leave the cones, the seed pods to develop, the goldfinches love those seeds. And so you will often see later on in the summer and in the fall, goldfinches coming in and out of your garden to eat these seeds. So look for the purple coneflower. And of course, they are pollinator favorites, be it the non-native honeybee or the native bumblebees. Summer phlox is another native plant that is a butterfly plant. Several species of butterflies will go after the summer phlox, Phlox paniculata. And there are several colors available, several heights available. All of them are lovely. But I would encourage you to look for this one, Phlox gina. This was a summer phlox discovered in the wild. This is not a man, this is a nature-made plant, all right, nature-made native. And the flowers are smaller, as you can see, which to my mind, it makes them wonderful for bouquets. I grow this in my cutting garden for bouquets. But the other thing about Phlox gina is that it tolerates a lot of shade. You can see this plant, which is on the downside of my rain garden. It's in mostly shade. This clump gets dappled sunlight through trees and shrubs. And look at how flower filled it is. And it blooms late into the summer as well. So a good one also for hummingbirds later in the summer and for butterflies later in the summer. Clustered mountain mint is one of my favorite plants. And there are several plants called mountain mint. So you want this one if you want this look. The look is nice because the leaves have a kind of a gray-green color. It doesn't spread as aggressively as mint, but on the other hand, it does spread. So just be prepared for that. And it really spreads a lot in moist soil. So if you grow it on more of the dry side, it will spread a little bit less. As you can see, the bees love it. And it looks nice for, it looks, how did that happen? It looks nice for a long time in my garden. My alarm just went off, so terrible. It looks nice for so many weeks in the garden that's a great reason to have it. It's also a great component for a bouquet. And all types of bees and pollinators like this plant. Once again, you got to have a dash of red. You have to, especially if you have a shade garden. And you have to have Lobelia cardinalis. Number one, hummingbirds, hummingbirds, hummingbirds. Number two, they are exclamation point plants. They are those tall plants that add a dose of excitement into what otherwise might be a mostly green shade garden. They also self-seed. I probably planted 3 or 4 lobelia cardinalis in this garden. Now I have 3 or 4 dozen at least. They are tall and thin, so they play well with others, including your traditional shade plants like a stilby and the hostas and ferns, and they will just kind of find their spot and they will add this drama into your landscape in midsummer without any, you know, planting from you. You don't really have to do anything to this plant except for maybe in the fall. If you want to, you can clear it out. Mine usually dies back in hard frost, and I don't have to do anything to it until I do a spring cleanup. If you need a native ground cover for dry shade, white wood aster cannot be beat. This is a plant that is weed smothering, perfect on slopes that are part shade or full shade. And it blooms later in the season. Here it is under my holly trees. The thing to know about this plant, however, is that it does self-seed. And so you will need to, if you don't want it everywhere, you will need to watch for it and pull it up where you don't want it. I love it in this particular part of my landscape because I don't want to have to weed here. I don't want to have to water, except for maybe in a drought, I might water this plant once a month. But otherwise, I leave it alone and the holly, prickly holly leaves fall down in there and I don't have to worry about that. I've got some non-native hydrangeas, as you can see, uh, growing in there, and the Aster divaricatus does fine with those. But if you've got a slope, and slopes can be problematic because they're dry, right? If you've got a slope in shade, you might want to investigate the whitewood aster. Helianthus is a tall yellow daisy. There are several cultivars and varieties available, a couple of different species available, but the pollinators love those yellow composite plants. And you can see a couple of the native bees in this picture. They are good as cut flowers, great back of the border plant. All right, plant this at the back of your perennial border. They do spread, so maybe better in bigger gardens. They get about 6 feet tall. So if you don't like tall plants, you don't want helianthus. All right, some people, they like their plants a little shorter. This is a tall one, but a pretty plant and a plant that is reliable and cheerful and blooms in mid to late summer. Stokes aster. Stokes aster is a nice plant, as you can see. Butterflies love this plant. It is short. It is purple or blue. There are yellow and I think pink and white varieties available as well. I like the blue and the purple myself. And this blooms in midsummer at the same time that the daylilies flower. So if you have daylilies, this one makes a good native companion to daylilies. Here's the tip that you should know about Stokes aster. They do not self-seed much, if at all, and they do not spread much, if at all. So for the best display of Stokes aster, plant them in groups of 5 or 7 or 9, a foot apart, kind of staggered, so that you have a group of them and you're going to be very happy with this plant. And here it is with the daylilies. There's some scabola there, the annual scabola, not a native, in the front. Back here are some verbascum and some peonies and some perennial hibiscus plants. But as you can see, midsummer, when the daylilies are in bloom in July, those Stokes asters bring a lot to the party. If you need a weed smothering ground cover for dry sun, you want Zagreb coreopsis, the thread leaf coreopsis. This is a plant that, again, it grows so thickly, it outcompetes the weeds. It flowers in July. When it's done flowering, the seed heads are little and dark and kind of black, and they're attractive. It's an attractive plant, whether it's in flower or not. And I encourage any of you who have a dry slope or a dry garden where you don't want to spread mulch or weed, this is the plant for you. And a native grass, blue grama grass. Look at those little seed heads there that are out, that like little eyelashes. When this plant is catching the rays of the rising or the setting sun, it is entrancing. It is magical. And there's a variety of this one called Blonde Ambition, worth buying just for the name alone, right? Um, but it's a grass that mixes nicely in a kind of a prairie style planting here with the echinacea. Perfect with echinacea. I have it growing in my annual alley where it mixes beautifully with zinnias and other coreopsis, or cosmos. Um, a nice plant because it's dainty and a native grass that never gets too huge and works well in that prairie style planting. If you're interested in natives, you have to have goldenrod. And the reason that you have to have goldenrod is that it is one of what people call a keystone native plant, that it is a native plant that supports a wide range of wildlife. And there are many, many varieties, many species of goldenrod, and there are many varieties of goldenrod. So you can find it short, medium, and tall. And know that if you have a tall goldenrod like Solidago canadensis, if at this time of year you do shear the top off of it, that'll keep it a little fuller and shorter, just FYI. A goldenrod will thrive in full sun or even part shade, and that's one reason that I love it. It's great in a bouquet as a cut flower and pretty in the late summer garden. And no, this is not ragweed. This is not what gives you hay fever. So look into that. Hay fever comes from ragweed, which looks nothing like goldenrod. Here on Cape Cod, our seaside goldenrod, you find that, along our beaches. And I was thrilled to see that we were selling it at Country Garden this year because it's not often available under cultivation. And so I love that here it is, our own seaside goldenrod that, as you can see, grows in pure sand, right? So no fertilizer necessary here, no water necessary here, just a nice lower goldenrod with beautiful flowers later in the summer. Asters are another plant that are very important to wildlife, including pollinators. There are many varieties that I love. This one is Woods Blue, which is a shorter variety. Know this about asters, however, bunnies like this plant, okay? So if you have a lot of rabbit pressure, you're either going to need to spray it, a couple of times early in the season with a rabbit repellent to keep the rabbits off of it, or you're not going to grow it because the rabbits do love this plant. Interestingly enough, the rabbits do not eat the heath aster, which you see growing wild around Cape Cod in many places, including probably in your yard. Some of the plants that you may think are weeds and you're pulling out, they might very well be this heath aster, and you might actually benefit from leaving it in your yard. There are several of our native weeds that are very nice to leave. Heath aster is one of them. The jewelweed is another. The taller erigeron is another one. So, and some of the goldenrods. So be willing to be flexible because there are some weeds that are attractive and beneficial. Now let's go on to some shrubs. So in shrubs, and this happens to be a picture of a button bush. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we'll start out with bearberry. I was talking with a customer today about her planting where she needed to use a lot of natives. And bearberry was one of the ones that is on the list. It is evergreen. It is low growing. It supports wildlife with the little berries that wildlife eats. It's drought tolerant. It's nitrogen fixing it, so it can grow in pure sand. Here's the key for you to know growing it, and that is that frequent irrigation is going to kill this plant. And many natives, this is the case. If you want to grow a lot of natives, I encourage you to set your irrigation so that you are not watering more frequently than once a week. Bearberry does need to be watered deeply once a week when you first plant it to get it established. After that, this is a plant that may not need irrigation at all. This is a plant you see growing along the highway on Route 3 going up, toward Plymouth, and on Route 6 going out toward P-Town, growing on the slopes in pure sand. It's dark green. Nobody is watering those plants. Nobody is fertilizing those plants, and they are thriving. So, but you need to give it something like those conditions. If you've got an irrigation system that's coming on every other day or every 3 days, this plant is going to be out of there. Sweet fern. I love sweet fern because it is sophisticated. It is thin. It is understated. It's not a fern. It is a shrub, a woody shrub called sweet fern because it looks very fern-like, doesn't it? And called sweet fern because if you crush the foliage, it has a lovely sweet fragrance. Grow this on the edge of woods. Grow this, and if you're planting it and you want a thicker planting, then plant them close together. Plant these plants 12 inches apart, and you will have a thicker, growth of it. But look at how this is. This is in a native area, a conservation area, and the yellow fall color of the clethra behind and that sweet fern in front. So a very low, maybe 18-inch growing plant that really deserves to be planted more often in our landscapes, particularly on the edge of woodlands, on the edge of a shaded area. Tiger eye sumac is a selected variety of our native staghorn sumac, all right? In the nursery at Bailey's Nursery, which is a big grower out in Minnesota, one of the horticulturalists noticed that they had a sumac that was shorter. It was a staghorn sumac and it was shorter and it had a bright kind of lime green color. And they propagated that and it is now available as tiger eye sumac. Yes, it does spread, not as vigorously as the other staghorn sumac, but stays short. Look at how beautiful that fall color is. Here it's with Aster Radin's favorite and Vernonia lettermanii, both natives in my garden. A very pretty plant and one that again deserves to be planted more frequently. We love our beach plums here on Cape Cod. We love them because they look beautiful when they're in flower. We love them because they grow in pure sand. We love them because they tolerate wind and salt air. So many reasons to love them. And many people love them because they can make beach plum jelly. If you want to grow beach plums, 4 beach plums, plant 3 or 5 or more so that they have cross-pollination. You get many, many more beach plums by planting them in a group of several. High bush blueberries. Now, this is a plant that deserves to be planted just for how it looks, not just for the berries. The flowers are beautiful. They've been in bloom now for a couple of weeks in my garden, pinkish. The bark is beautiful and the fall color is beautiful. Right? This gives the invasive burning bush a run for its money because it is a brilliant red with yellow, a native plant. The birds love the berries. if you don't have yours netted, you might get one or two, but the birds are probably going to get most of them. But this is worth planting for how it looks in the landscape for sure. Nine bark, Physocarpus, and there are many, many varieties available. And there are many varieties available that have burgundy or purple or black or golden leaves. So look for those. They're just quite a selection and they are so lovely. They bloom in June. This one is center glow. Look at the color of those leaves. They bloom in June. They are a fountain-like shape. There it is, right? An Amsonia with a nine bark, a fountain-like shape in June. One hint about nine bark, this is not a plant for people who like to shear their shrubs into green meatballs, all right? Or in this case, purple meatballs. Because what makes this plant attractive are those long arching canes and that fountainy look. That's what makes this plant pretty. So if you have landscapers who routinely shear your shrubs, tell them, shearing tools off this plant. And if you are a home landscaper, shearing tools off this plant, the only pruning that you should do normally on a nine bark is removing anything dead. Well, if you see something, that looks odd, you can cut it off down at ground level. These are cane growers. They grow up from the ground. So if you cut a couple of the canes down at ground level, the plant will just make more. Oak leaf hydrangeas. Now, people think about this plant as a plant for shade, but actually this grows beautifully in full sun. And there is a reason to plant oak leaf in full sun that I'll show you in a minute. It tolerates shade. It blooms best in part shade or part sun. They do very well in those situations. Plant this, pay attention to how big this plant is going to get and place it accordingly, because this is not a plant that you want to try and control its size. Like our signature blue hydrangeas, the oak leaf form their flower buds the year in advance, and you can't make them shorter. Just like the blue hydrangeas, you can't make them shorter. Give it up. Plant them where they can get to be their genetically predetermined size and shape. And the oak leaf are a little asymmetrical, except that let that happen. And this is the reason to plant them in full sun or part sun. You get incredible fall color, red and purple. And you will be blown away by the fall color of oak leaf hydrangeas when they're growing in full sun to part sun. Button bush. Now, fortunately, this is a plant that more growers are growing. We have a variety at Country Garden called Sugar Shack, which is a variety that I grow in my yard as well. I mean, look at these flowers. They're fun. They're like Sputnik flowers, if you are old enough as I am to remember Sputnik and that whole design look. These are Sputnik flowers. And number one, the pollinators love them. When these are in bloom, there are bees and wasps and little flies and all kinds of other pollinators all over this plant. Number two, they have glossy green leaves. They get about 4 or 5 feet tall and 5 to 6 feet wide. So good combination with other shrubs. And when the flowers go by, these are the fruits. So this is how it looks later in the summer and into the fall with those cute fruits. A lot of reasons to grow button bush. So look at this because it's more widely available. Thank goodness. If you have a large spot that you want to fill with a native plant, so that you don't have to mulch or weed underneath that plant, you want a bottle brush buckeye. Say you've got a place behind the shed. I've got one growing behind one of my sheds. It has completely filled a 12 by 10 foot area, as you can see, beautifully, right? And it grows so densely that other plants don't get established in there. Underneath that bottle brush buckeye, there are no poison ivy growing. There's no bittersweet growing. There's no greenbrier growing, right? All the normal bird planted things that we end up having to weed out, they don't grow in this area because the bottle brush buckeye is so thick. So it's a problem solving plant, but know that it's big, plant it where it can get big. And look at that. When it's in flower in midsummer, it is just gorgeous, a stunning plant. Oh, one of my favorite plants is summer sweet clethra alnifolia, also called sweet pepper bush, because of how the seed pods look. They look like peppercorns. They are not peppercorns. Don't eat them. But sweet pepper bush. First of all, if you have a fire pit, you need this plant somewhere nearby. It's fragrant in midsummer when you are out by the fire pit. If you have a patio, you need a clethra nearby. If you have a screen porch, you need a clethra nearby. You get what I'm going for, right? Fragrance in July and August. I recommended this to a friend of mine who has a screen porch in the mid-Hudson Valley. And when it first came into bloom, she called me up in an evening to thank me because of that sweet fragrance. It's not overpowering, but it's just lovely. And it has great fall color as well. Winterberry holly. And this is a picture that I took in the wild. So this is in Scorton Creek area. And winterberry does grow in the wild, which is great, but it also grows well in your garden. And we love it because, first of all, once the fall comes, you have those berries along the stem, and then the leaves fall off of the stem, and you still have the berries into December. And then you have the pleasure of, once those berries start to ferment a little bit, you have the pleasure of watching those Canadian robins who have come down to Cape Cod for spring break get drunk on these berries and hang out by your bird bath. So and other birds love them too, but a good bird plant, a pretty plant for fall and winter interest for you. Fothergilla, this is another one that deserves to be planted more often. There are several varieties available. It blooms in May in the garden with these bottle brush flowers, a good early support plant for pollinators. And even better, it has great fall color. It grows in sun or shade, and most of them get between 4 and 5 feet tall. It's a plant that can kind of sucker to the right and the left. So if you need to fill a space or stabilize a slope, this is a good plant. And look, how can you not want this in the fall? You have to have this in the fall. Oh, let's talk about a couple of trees. And this one is a Franklinia tree. Franklinia is a tree with one of the best backstories a plant can have. So if you like history and you like a good backstory, write down Franklinia and Google it. Google the history of the Franklinia tree. Now, besides the backstory, you want it because it blooms in the fall. You know, we have all kinds of spring flowering trees, great, right? But how about a tree that flowers in September? Franklinia, and the bees love it. Oh, I thought I had a picture of the bee. The bees love this plant. Our native bees love this plant. And you often get those white flowers at the same time that the leaves are turning red. Now, you can see a big, large Franklinia at Armstrong Kelly Park in Esterville, or you can come and visit my garden during the Cape Cod Hydrangea Festival and take a look at my tree. We don't give enough respect to several of our natives that occur naturally, and that many people end up clearing out without giving it a second thought, and it's a shame. American holly is our native holly. The trunk, the bark is beautiful. The berries are beautiful. Many, many birds, including bluebirds and the robins and other birds, eat the fruit of this plant. grows well in part sun or part shade. It's a great screening tree for privacy from the neighbors, you know. So this is a plant that does deserve more respect. And here, this is a native holly. And you can see here it is growing with the Amsonia. And here it is. This is a Japanese umbrella pine here, and the oak trees behind. So a lovely screening plant. Plant this in among your other plants, whether they are native or not. Now, know that I don't answer raised hands. I remember I told you at the beginning, type your questions in chat and we will get to them after I finish the presentation. And we are almost there. Sweet Bay Magnolia. This is one that I want more people to plant. I can't tell you how much I love this small tree, our native magnolia. And I love it, first of all, because the flowers are fragrant. In the evenings, when this plant is in bloom in midsummer, you will smell that fragrance. Or first thing in the morning, if you go out and have coffee near your Sweet Bay Magnolia, you will smell those beautiful, fragrant flowers. But secondly, I love this Sweet Bay Magnolia because the underside of the leaves are silver and the tops of the leaves are green. And so in our Cape Cod breeze, look what you see. Silver, green, silver, green, silver, green. You know, this, and it's semi-evergreen. It keeps at least half of its leaves all winter long. So you have leaves in the winter, you have the flowers, you have seed pods that feed native wildlife, and you can sit out and watch this moving in the sea breeze, silver green, silver green. A wonderful, wonderful multi-stemmed magnolia plant. Tulip trees, Liodendron, are a lovely native tree. Now, these are a big tree, so you want to plant these where they can get large, all right? It is also a tree that tolerates salt spray and salt water, so it is a good, you know, kind of first line of defense near the ocean native tree. And when you look at that flower, they are just so amazing. And we mentioned Franklinia tree. Okay, there's my bee picture. I had it out of order. All right, so you can see we've got native bumblebees and non-native honeybees cohabitating in the Franklinia tree here. And it's just a great plant. And there, we saw that before. I chose to show a picture of heritage river birch bark because that's what's magical about this plant. Well, they're a nice plant. They grow quickly. They're a tall plant. So if you want a very tall, very quick, kind of not huge, massive, heavy screening plant, heritage river birch does the job because they are fast growing. But look at this bark, papery, right? And gorgeous 12 months of the year. And it is a birch that doesn't have as many problems as the white birches do. White birches often don't live that long here on Cape Cod, particularly the Himalayan white birch. But the heritage river birch, this is a stylish, beautiful plant. Redbud trees, and redbud trees come in a variety of types and sizes and foliage colors. Check them out, heart-shaped leaves. They do fine in part shade or full sun. There's some that are quite small, so suitable for those places where you want something small and not that grows too large. This is a variety here called the Rising Sun. And don't forget about our eastern red cedar, Juniperus virginiana. Again, these berries on the female junipers support a wide range of wildlife, and many, many birds eat eastern red cedar berries, which is why you will find little eastern red cedars springing up around the edges and under the trees in your landscape, because the birds have eaten the seeds and planted them there underneath your trees. You can transplant them. Know one thing about these plants is they self-hybridize, and which means what you get from a Juniperus virginiana seedling varies quite a bit. You can find them, you can get ones that are tall and thin, you can get ones that are big and fat, you can get ones that turn bronze in the winter and ones that stay green in the winter. From a seed grown plant, you really don't know what you're going to get with an Eastern red cedar, but that can be part of the fun for sure. And don't forget, please don't forget to cherish our native oaks. Our native oaks sustain more species of wildlife than any other plants. And I call them the Rodney Dangerfield of trees because they get no respect. And right now, as they come out, they are so sweet and beautiful. People chop down oaks without thinking twice. And it is such a shame. It is such a shame. They are treasures, and we treat them as if, oh, well, I want to grow roses here, so I'm going to get rid of this plant. Think twice, think three times, think four times before getting rid of your native oaks. And our native swamp maple, Acer rubrum. This is one right outside my deck, and it's a fall color. They're often called red maples, not because they have red fall color. They're called red maples because the flowers in the spring, right now in my garden, if I could show you the picture right outside my window here, you would see that the flowers and seeds are red on this plant. And they are lovely native maples as well. And in terms of a native vine, plant this one. It doesn't get too huge. It won't rip down your trellis, right? It is our native honeysuckle. Hummingbirds love it. You can find this one, which is just the Lonicera sempervirens. And then there is this one, which is Major Wheeler, which has coral color flowers. And this one blooms for most of the summer. Again, a great hummingbird plant. So look for a native vine in our native honeysuckle. And, at Country Garden, the new natives arrive frequently. We've got them mixed in with some of the other plants on the tables. We've got a little corner where you can find a selection of them. Come and check them out. Talk to the employees about them. You will find that new ones are constantly coming in. And if you don't find your favorite, ask us, all right? The recording of this will be on the bottom of the events page at hyanniscountrygarden.com very soon. And if I didn't mention your favorite native, know that it's because we're, already kind of out of time, but I am willing to answer some questions here on chat. So we're going to stop the share. We're going to come back and I'm going to answer questions for, at least 15, 20 minutes because, we can't go without questions on this sort of thing. All right, I'm going to go back up to the top here. Shade-loving perennials, bunny resistant. Maybe, maybe not. So if there's a particular one you're interested in, you can email me, calfanari@countrygarden.com, and I'll tell you if it's bunny resistant or not. But a lot of natives are. Let's see, does celandine poppy do well in dry, sandy shade? It likes moisture shade, not dry shade. It likes a little more moisture. So the place where you put compost and maybe the garden that you water once a week or every 2 weeks. Suggestions for a border shrub that don't get taller than 10 feet native. Boarded shrub taller than 10 feet. Well, oak leaf hydrangeas, certainly, because some of those are perfect in that size range. Our native clethra, particular varieties like the straight species, gets up around 7, 8 feet. And September Beauty gets up in that same size range. Some of our native viburnums, so come in and look for native viburnums as well. And if you want evergreens to mix in with that, then put in some of the native junipers, the Eastern red cedars. I'm particularly interested in native, edible, or medicinal plants. You know what? I'm not going to answer that question because, first of all, talking about edibles without pictures in front of you, there can be misunderstandings. And I don't even play a doctor on TV. So I'm going to leave you to research that on your own. And apologies, but it's if you're talking about edible plants, you need pictures to talk about them. Let's see. Here we go. When can you plant seeds of columbine? I would plant them in midsummer when the normal columbine, right now, the columbine is almost ready to go to flower, right? And then it creates seeds, and those seeds drop in midsummer and stay on the surface of the soil. So that's what I would do. I would plant them when nature scatters them in midsummer. Your amaryllis is getting ready to bloom. The stem is broken and it looks like it might bloom. You know what? If the stem is broken, then cut it off and have it as a cut flower. These make great cut flowers. And sometimes they break because the flowers are so big and heavy. Is black and blue salvia a perennial? Not here yet. Black and blue salvia is a warm zone 7 plant. We are at best in a cold zone 7. I did get it to overwinter one year with hay protection, not cutting it back, but don't count on it. So don't count on it here. Can I dig that sweet fern up and transplant it, and will it do good? You cannot dig it up out of the wild. That is illegal. Do not do it. So buy a sweet fern plant and it will do good. It will do good. Plant it in. All right. Don't dig it up out of the wild. Please do not do that. Our conservation area need our native plants because they are holding the fort and in the invasion of the invasives. Okay, so don't dig them out of the wild. Would bearberry do well by the road? What does it look like in the winter? Yes, it would do well by the road. It looks dark green and shiny in the winter. You can see it along the highways. I don't know that if I put it a foot from the road, but I certainly wouldn't hesitate to put it 3, 5, 7 feet from the road. It also can grow near the ocean, so we know that it tolerates salt, although in a bad road salt year, there can be a lot of salt. So, but yes, you can plant that near the road. Spell Franklinia. That was on the slide. I hope you saw it. Franklinia. I think that's it. Franklinia. Yeah. How to fertilize holly. If you need to fertilize your holly, you would give it a light application of Hollytone. Make sure that you need to fertilize it. If your holly is a native holly and growing with other plants and you've allowed the leaves to stay on the ground around it, right? Then you shouldn't really need to fertilize it. Or, more and more we come to the place here on Cape Cod where we acknowledge that we need to protect our waterways, and automatic fertilization may not be in our interest. And so if your holly isn't looking well, then by all means give it an application of Hollytone. But frankly, the first thing to do if your plant isn't doing well is to put an inch or two of compost all around the soil, because that's organic matter. That's nature's way of keeping plants healthy. So first the compost, and then maybe the Hollytone. What type of male American holly will pollinate a female? Or how can I tell if the one I have is male or female, if you only have one? All right, you want to first of all, you can Google close-up flowers on male holly and see the picture. All right, go to Google image and type that in, and then take a magnifying glass out to your holly when it's in bloom and compare. Number 2, it's likely you have a male because most female hollies in this area get fertilized. There's a male close enough from somewhere to fertilize them. So usually if you don't have berries, you have a male holly, not a female holly. But Google what the male flowers look like in close up and then compare when they are in bloom. And in terms of to my knowledge, there isn't a named male American holly. The winterberry holly that's a male that is commonly sold is called Southern Gentleman. But you can find them often just labeled the American hollies male and female. I filled my future perennial areas with bark mulch. Well, I'm hoping not too thick because you can't plant in bark mulch. And if you did fill it and are intending to wait until it decomposes, you're going to have to wait 3 or 4 years before you plant much there. Okay. Uh, how big do buttonbush get? Zach, they get about 5 feet tall and 6 feet wide in that area. Yeah. Let's see. Let's go down here. I got to scroll down. What does socks and shoes mean? That's a great question, Maureen. Thank you. We talk about socks and shoes plants. Those are the plants that you plant around shrubs or trees to give those plants socks and shoes. If you think about it, how nature grows plants, once again, and this is like a broken record with me, is think about how nature does it, because nature is our best garden coach. Socks and shoes plants are plants that cover the ground around taller plants. This is how nature grows plants, right? Nature grows plants in community where you have a low layer of plants, and then you've got a few taller ones that grow, and then you've got shrubs that are a little taller than that, and then maybe you have trees up above. So communities, and if we grow plants in communities, we have fewer weeds, right? We have less mulching to do, right? And number three, we get to look at a layer of plants underneath that shrub that we love. So that's what socks and shoes are. I have 5 or 6 beach plums, but they aren't thriving. Any suggestions? They're in full sun in an area that is pretty sandy. I would probably, if I were you, these do grow fine in pure sand, but number one, I would probably look at those plants, and if there are any branches that are like really older, I might cut a few of those off. So if you've got a lot of branches, look at each plant individually and clip off an older stem. That's going to stimulate new growth. That's number one. Number two, I put an application of compost all around the base of those plants and to help beef up the soil life. And number three, although these are drought tolerant plants, if we're in a drought, I might give them, I might water them deeply every two or 3 weeks. What is a nativar? A nativar, that's a name for a plant that has been identified in the wild, not something that somebody has created in a test tube, but a plant that has self-hybridized and varied in the wild. And plants do this all the time. Plants change all the time. And in fact, the plant that is a particular native, like a liatris here on Cape Cod, often looks different than a liatris that grows in the South somewhere, or even on Martha's Vineyard. And very often when a plant is seen to be different, an example is Vernonia iron butterfly. This was a native plant, but it was different, and it was seen in the wild, and then people take it, give it a name, and then cultivate it and sell it. We often also call those cultivars, but people confuse that then with a variety that was intentionally crossed by people, rather than just discovered by people that it was a natural cross, and people see it and say that has value because it's shorter or lives longer or more drought tolerant or whatever they see in the plant. And so they propagate it and bring it to market. One of my large allium bulbs has a stem that's dropped over midway before blooming. Any idea what could have caused this? High wind, number one. It's been windy, that's one. Number two, an animal bumped against it, or a purple person working in the area bumped against it. I suppose something, a branch that falls could do that as well. Is sassafras native? I really like the variety of leaves. I like them too. It is a great native plant with great fall color. It's the original source of sarsaparilla, the drink that came before root beer, and it's another one of those plants that we see in the wild, but aren't often offered for sale, unfortunately. Now, sometimes it's because they don't transplant well, um, but sometimes it's just because there hasn't been the demand for them. And I love if you've got space for plants that spread and kind of sucker, and if you've got space for big trees, sassafras are lovely, lovely plants. Trumpet honeysuckle fertilizer on a 2-year-old plant. Only if you know it needs fertilizer. Again, never assume that a plant has to be fertilized. And have a soil test done. A University of Massachusetts tests soil. All you have to do is Google UMass Soil Test Lab, and you will find out the directions to how to do it. And you never want to assume that you have to fertilize. Have a soil test done and find out. If you want to give it a boost in the meantime because you're feeling generous, dump some compost there. An inch of compost on the surface of the soil would be very wonderful. Does Country Gardens carry summer sweet? Yes, we do carry a few different varieties of clethra. So come on in. I don't know what's there right now. This is the time of year that the trucks are rolling in so fast that it's impossible to keep up with what's there. But it is a common plant that we always carry. Buttonbush often grows by fresh water, not salt tolerant. So does it need a moist, wet environment, or is it amenable to drier upland meadows? I would not necessarily put it in a dry meadow. I would absolutely not hesitate to put it in your standard garden that might get irrigated every couple of weeks if it has not rained. I have mine growing. It's not in my rain garden, it's near my rain garden. So it's in an area where the water drains down to. And if you've got one of those areas, that's a good place to put a button bush. But I would not plant it in a meadow that I am not going to water. All right. I would keep it for a wetter place. All right. I am going to save chat at this point. Save chat. She's clipping on it. So that if there are questions that I have not answered yet, or if I inadvertently skipped over them, I will answer them on the Hyannis Country Garden blog on Monday. You can go back and review this presentation on the recording or see the recording on Facebook a little bit later once that gets mounted. In the meantime, I am so pleased that you joined me tonight, and know that this was the tip of the iceberg about native plants, because there are far more that we didn't even have time to mention today. So come into the garden center and let's talk. Take care and have a good weekend.